I should have known something extraordinary would happen when I saw the human walk into our conference hall. The way she carried herself, completely unbothered by the artificial gravity fluctuations that made most species queasy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Galactic Science Academy's annual quantum physics conference is usually a perfectly predictable affair. We gather, we present our minor advances in understanding the universe, we congratulate ourselves on our intellectual superiority, and we go home. Not this time. Oh no, not this time at all. The conference hall stretched before me, its crystalline walls refracting light in complex patterns that normally soothed my neural pathways. Today they seemed to mock us with their quantum uncertainty dance. Around me, some of the greatest minds in the galaxy shifted uncomfortably in their hover seats. Professor Lunar Starweaver's bioluminescent tentacles were practically tied in knots, a clear sign of Arcturian distress. The reason? That morning's presentation had been unfortunate. The Paradise Paradox, our most challenging quantum physics problem, had resisted another attempt at resolution. This time, it had been Professor Starweaver's own theory that crashed and burned. The mathematics had seemed perfect until that final variable revealed itself, like a practical joke played by the universe itself. "Perhaps we should take a short recess," I suggested, my secondary voice box vibrating with diplomatic harmonics. The quantum probability matrices are clearly not aligning with our current theoretical framework. That's when she walked in. Dr. Eleanor Martinez, though she quickly informed everyone to call her Elle, moved through the room like she owned it. Her dark hair was tied back in what I later learned was called a messy bun, and she carried one of those human stimulant containers, coffee, as if it were a lifeline. "Sorry I'm late," she announced, her voice carrying an odd musical quality that humans call laughter. "Traffic was horrible. Would you believe someone parked their spacecraft in the quantum tunneling lane?" Several crystalline beings near the entrance shattered in shock at her casual tone. "We're still finding their fragments." The human approached the central podium, completely ignoring the horrified gasps from the methane breathers section. She pulled out what appeared to be— my sensory appendages must have been malfunctioning— a paper notebook. Physical paper, in a quantum physics conference. "I couldn't help but overhear something about a paradox," she said, flipping through her primitive recording device. "Mind if I take a look? I've got about 20 minutes before lunch, and I'm starving." Professor Starweaver's tentacles went from knotted to completely rigid. 20 minutes, she whispered in disbelief. "The Paradise Paradox has stumped our greatest minds for 3 centuries. Dr. Martinez just shrugged, took another sip of her coffee, and grinned. "Perfect! That leaves me 10 minutes to grab a sandwich." Looking back now, I realize that was the moment everything we thought we knew about humans and quantum physics was about to change. And to think it all started with a being from a death world, armed with nothing but caffeine and audacity. The Paradise Paradox wasn't just any scientific puzzle. It was the puzzle, the one that made quantum physicists wake up in cold sweats, assuming their species could sweat. The problem that turned promising young scientists into baristas at galactic Starbucks, serving coffee to humans who seemed unnaturally obsessed with the bitter liquid. "So," Dr. Martinez said, pulling up a chair backwards and sitting on it the wrong way, because of course she would, "what's this paradox that's got everyone's appendages in a twist?" Professor Lunar Starweaver projected the equations onto the central hologram, her tentacles still twitching from her earlier failure. The beautiful, terrible mathematics floated in the air like a mocking dance of symbols. The Paradise Paradox showed that according to our most fundamental understanding of quantum mechanics, consciousness itself shouldn't exist. Yet here we were, conscious beings arguing about consciousness, creating the universe's most annoying loop of self-reference. "Every species has tried to crack it," I explained, watching Dr. Martinez scribble in her notebook with what appeared to be a wooden stick filled with graphite. The Rigelians attempted a pure mathematical approach, calculating for 3 decades straight until their quantum computers achieved enlightenment and refused to work on anything except meditation apps. Dr. Martinez snorted. Actually snorted. And let me guess, the computers started charging subscription fees for inner peace. The Arcturians, I continued pretending not to hear her, tried using their natural quantum entanglement abilities. They managed to link 15,000 minds together in what they called the Great Consciousness Experiment of 3,275. What happened? They all simultaneously developed an addiction to what you humans call reality shows and had to be forcibly separated. We still can't get Professor Starweaver to stop talking about something called the Real Housewives of Alpha Centauri. The human's shoulders shook with barely contained laughter as she took another sip of her coffee. Even the Crystalline Collective had a go, I added, gesturing to the recently shattered beings still being swept up. They theorized that their naturally occurring quantum computational structures could solve it. Instead, they proved that the universe is actually a simulation, had an existential crisis, and spent the next year trying to find the universe's tech support number. And what exactly happens if someone does solve it? Dr. Martinez asked, her eyes scanning the equations with unsettling intensity. Professor Starweaver floated forward, her tentacles finally unknotting enough to gesture dramatically. The implications would be enormous. We would understand the true nature of consciousness, revolutionize quantum computing, possibly even crack the code of reality itself. The solving species would automatically be granted level 10 civilization status and— Yeah, Dr. Martinez interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. But what's the actual problem? In simple terms, the audacity, the sheer human audacity. 3 centuries of the finest minds in the galaxy had dedicated their lives to this paradox, and she wanted it explained in simple terms. The Paradise Paradox shows that consciousness requires quantum coherence at a macroscopic scale, Professor Starweaver began, her voice taking on the tone used for teaching particularly slow larvae. But according to all known physics, such coherence should be impossible in the warm, wet environment of a biological brain. Yet consciousness exists. The mathematics suggests it cannot, but reality suggests it must, hence paradox. Dr. Martinez had stopped writing. Her eyes narrowed at the floating equations, then widened suddenly. She took one last long drink from her coffee cup, set it down with unnecessary force, and stood up. "Oh," she said, in the same tone someone might use to point out a misplaced semicolon. "Is that all?" The room went so quiet you could hear a quantum fluctuation. "Is that all?" Professor Starweaver's tentacles began to knot again. This paradox has destroyed careers, driven the brightest minds to madness. The quantum physics division's entire reputation rests on— "Yeah, about that," Dr. Martinez interrupted again, pulling her phone from her pocket and checking the time. "Mind if we continue this over lunch? I'm thinking the cafeteria might have those purple sandwiches from last year. You know, the ones that sing when you bite them?" The Galactic Science Academy's cafeteria was designed to accommodate beings from 47 different atmospheric requirements and 92 distinct digestive systems. Yet somehow, Dr. Martinez made a beeline for the one food item that could potentially violate the laws of physics, the quantum uncertainty sandwich. "You cannot be serious," I said, watching her pile 3 of them onto her tray. "Those sandwiches exist in a quantum superposition of edible and inedible states until observed. Last week, Dr. Krell Brightscale spent 6 hours in a temporal loop trying to finish one. Speaking of the devil, or whatever equivalent deity the Rigelians believed in, Dr. Brightscale himself appeared at our table. His crystalline exoskeleton caught the light, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the cafeteria walls. "Did someone mention my temporal sandwich incident?" "Pull up a chair, Doc," Dr. Martinez called out, already unwrapping her first sandwich. "We're about to solve the Paradise Paradox between bites." Dr. Brightscale's external crystalline layers flickered in what I recognized as Rigelian amusement. "Yes, I heard about this morning's excitement.
The cleaning crew is still picking up pieces of our crystalline colleagues.
He settled his angular form into a chair designed for approximately nobody's comfort. Though I must admit, your approach to the paradox intrigues me. Most beings don't suggest solving fundamental problems of quantum physics over lunch. That's because most beings, Dr. Martinez said through a mouthful of sandwich that was simultaneously existing and not existing, take themselves way too seriously. Pass the quantum-stable salt, would you? Professor Starweaver's tentacles writhed in horror at the casual violation of both dining etiquette and quantum mechanics. But the equations, the formal proofs, the peer review process. Look, Dr. Martinez said, pulling out her primitive notebook again. She had somehow gotten quantum-shifted mustard on one corner. Sometimes you need to step back from the math and just watch. She pointed her sandwich at the cafeteria around us. A methane breather was trying to figure out how to use a straw through their environmental suit. Two energy beings were sharing the same power outlet and arguing about who was hogging the electrons. A group of silicon-based life forms were attempting to understand the concept of dessert. What exactly are we watching? Dr. Brightscale asked, his crystalline structure vibrating with curiosity. Consciousness, Dr. Martinez replied, taking another bite. Raw, messy, impossible consciousness, happening right here in this room. And none of these beings are questioning whether they're conscious or not. They're too busy trying to figure out if their lunch will quantum tunnel off their plates.
But that's exactly the problem, Professor Starweaver exclaimed, according to every mathematical model we have.
Your models, Dr. Martinez interrupted, pulling a pen from her messy bun, are trying to solve consciousness from the outside in. You're all looking at it like it's a machine you can take apart and study. But consciousness isn't a thing, it's a process. Like this sandwich. She held up her half-eaten lunch, which chose that moment to start humming a popular Venusian opera.
The sandwich, Dr. Brightscale said slowly, is consciousness.
No, look, when we try to measure quantum states, we affect them, right? But when we're just experiencing them, living in them, they work fine. The sandwich exists in multiple states until we try to pin it down, but it still makes a perfectly good lunch, undefined quantum state and all. She scribbled something in her notebook, then turned it around to show us. Among the coffee stains and mustard smears was a series of equations that made my tertiary brain start to ache. You see, consciousness isn't maintaining quantum coherence in a classical environment. It is the quantum coherence. We're not measuring it from the outside, we're surfing it from the inside. Dr. Brightscale's crystalline structure began to resonate at a frequency I'd never seen before. By the great lattice, he whispered, the mathematics, they're so simple, so elegant, so— Wrong, Professor Starweaver cut in. They must be wrong. 3 centuries of research can't be overturned by a human eating a quantum unstable sandwich. Why not? Dr. Martinez asked, starting on her second sandwich. This one was performing a small percussion solo. Sometimes the best solutions come when you're not trying so hard to find them. Like how I figured out my graduate thesis while watching cat videos, or how Newton supposedly got the idea for gravity when an apple fell on his head. A fruit attacked your species' greatest physicist? I asked, horrified. No, it's just a— Never mind. The point is, you've all been so focused on proving consciousness can't exist that you forgot to notice it already does. The paradox isn't in the math. It's in the assumption that consciousness needs to follow the rules we think it should. She finished her second sandwich with a flourish, and I swear I saw probability waves ripple across the cafeteria. Now, who wants to see the actual proof? I've got it right here, next to my shopping list and a doodle of Professor Starweaver's tentacles doing the wave. Dr. Martinez flipped her notebook around, revealing a page that looked like a cross between advanced mathematics and what appeared to be a sketch of something called a rubber duck. Okay, so you know how cats are both alive and dead in that famous thought experiment? She asked, casually starting her third quantum sandwich. This one was performing an interpretive dance. Schrödinger's cat,
Professor Starweaver corrected, her tentacles twitching at the informal reference to one of quantum physics' most fundamental principles. A cornerstone thought experiment demonstrating quantum superposition through—
Yeah, that one, Dr. Martinez interrupted, waving her sandwich dismissively. Well, what if consciousness works the same way, but in reverse? Instead of being an observer that collapses quantum states, what if consciousness is the quantum state that collapses into an observer? Dr. Brightscale's crystalline structure emitted a high-pitched tone of confusion. That makes no sense. Sure it does. Look at this cafeteria. Right now there are beings here breathing methane, eating pure energy, and literally running on silicon. But they're all conscious, right? What if consciousness isn't the result of quantum processes in the brain, but rather the quantum process that allows brains to exist in the first place? She grabbed a handful of salt packets and arranged them on the table. Think of it like this. You've all been trying to figure out how a warm, wet brain can maintain quantum coherence. But that's like trying to figure out how a TV show maintains its coherence when your TV is unplugged. The show exists independently of the TV. The TV just lets you watch it. Are you suggesting, I asked, my neural pathways struggling to process this concept, that consciousness is some sort of quantum broadcast? More like a quantum dance. Here, watch this. She stood up and started moving her arms in a strange pattern. This is what you all think consciousness is doing. She moved robotically, precise and measured. But really, it's more like this. She switched to a fluid, chaotic motion that somehow seemed more natural. Professor Starweaver's tentacles had tied themselves into what I believe humans call a pretzel. But the mathematical models clearly show. The models show what you're looking for. Dr. Martinez sat back down, grinning. You're all trying to find consciousness in the machinery of the brain. But consciousness is what's running the machinery in the first place. It's like, okay, you know how humans invented pizza before we understood the chemistry of baking? What is pizza? Dr. Brightscale asked. Not important right now, but remind me to introduce you to it later. The point is, you don't need to understand how something works to use it. Consciousness doesn't need to understand quantum mechanics to use quantum mechanics, any more than I need to understand the quantum uncertainty of this sandwich to eat it. She pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. Look, I can show you the math. The paradox only exists because you're assuming consciousness emerges from classical brain states. But if you flip it around, assume consciousness is the quantum state that classical brain states emerge from. Her fingers flew across the screen as she pulled up what appeared to be a dating app, closed it with a blush, then opened her calculator. See? The equations balance perfectly. Consciousness isn't maintaining quantum coherence in a classical environment, it's creating classical coherence from a quantum environment. The cafeteria had gone eerily quiet. Even the quantum sandwiches had stopped their musical performance. But that would mean— Professor Starweaver's voice trailed off. That would mean, Dr. Brightscale continued, his crystalline structure vibrating with excitement, that consciousness isn't an emergent property of complex systems. It's what allows complex systems to emerge in the first place, I finished, feeling my own consciousness expanding with the implications. Bingo! Dr. Martinez exclaimed, finishing her last sandwich with a flourish. And the best part, it works across all species, all brain types, because it's not about the hardware, it's about the quantum software. That's why you can have conscious methane breathers and conscious crystals, and conscious energy beings all sharing the same cafeteria. She looked at her watch and stood up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to grab some coffee before I explain how this solves faster than light travel too. Anyone want anything from the quantum coffee machine? I hear it makes a mean espresso, although there's a 50% chance it'll turn into tea when you drink it. Back in the conference hall, Dr. Martinez stood before the quantum hologram projector, coffee in one hand, half-eaten quantum cookie in the other.
The cookie was reciting quantum mechanics theorems in soprano.
"Right, so who wants to see this thing in action?" she asked, brushing crumbs off her notebook. The assembled scientists murmured nervously. Showing rather than just theorizing? How terrifyingly human. "The quantum visualization chamber hasn't been calibrated for your unusual approach," Professor Starweaver protested, her tentacles forming anxiety spirals. "Perfect. Uncalibrated is exactly what we want." Dr. Martinez tapped her equations into the system. "Hey, Dr. Brightscale, mind if I borrow a piece of your consciousness? Just the quantum bit. I'll give it right back." Dr. Brightscale's crystalline structure flickered in surprise. "You want to borrow my consciousness?" "Just a teensy sample, like taking a quantum selfie but with your awareness instead of your face." Before anyone could stop her, she adjusted the hologram settings. The air shimmered, and suddenly we could see it. The quantum signature of Dr. Brightscale's consciousness, dancing like the northern lights of Earth, which I've never seen, but humans keep insisting are quite pretty. "Now watch this," she said, taking a long sip of coffee. She typed in another command, and her own consciousness signature appeared alongside Dr. Brightscale's. The patterns were completely different. His structured and geometric, hers chaotic and fluid, but they pulsed with the same underlying rhythm. "But that's impossible," Professor Starweaver gasped. "A crystalline consciousness matrix cannot share harmonic resonance with a carbon-based neural network." "Says who?" Dr. Martinez grinned. "Check this out." She pressed another button, and consciousness signatures from every being in the room appeared, overlapping and interweaving. Methane breather patterns, silicon thought structures, energy being oscillations, all different, all unique, but all dancing to the same quantum beat. "The patterns," Dr. Brightscale whispered, his voice resonating with awe. "They're not just similar, they're complementary." "Like different instruments playing the same song," Dr. Martinez agreed, "or different languages describing the same sunset, or different toppings on the same." "Please," I interrupted, "no more pizza analogies." She laughed and pointed to a particular intersection of patterns. "See that? That's what you've been missing. Consciousness doesn't maintain quantum coherence because it needs to. It maintains quantum coherence because that's what it is. Watch what happens when I—" She typed in one final command. The patterns shifted, and suddenly we could see the quantum classical boundary, the place where consciousness interfaces with physical reality. It wasn't fighting entropy or struggling against decoherence. It was surfing it, using the very chaos it was supposed to be fighting against to maintain its stability. A young methane breather scientist in the back raised their appendage. "But according to the Gaussian distribution of quantum probability—" "Here we go again with the Gaussian distributions," Dr. Martinez sighed. "Okay, pop quiz. Are you thinking about that distribution right now?" "Yes, of course. How do you know you're thinking about it?" "Because I'm conscious of—" "Oh." "Exactly. You're using consciousness to question consciousness. It's like trying to see your own eyes without using a mirror. You can't step outside the system to measure it because you are the system." The hologram swirled with the combined consciousness signatures of hundreds of the galaxy's greatest minds, all suddenly understanding that they'd been overthinking it the whole time. Professor Starweaver's tentacles had gone completely still, a sure sign of deep contemplation or minor neural shutdown. "But the most beautiful part," Dr. Martinez said, finishing her coffee with a flourish, "is that we've all been using this all along. Every conversation, every thought, every moment of awareness. We've been quantum dancing together across the cosmos, and we didn't even know it. Well, except for the quantum sandwiches. They knew. That's why they sing." She checked her watch again. "Now, about that faster-than-light travel solution. Anyone want to grab dinner? I heard the quantum pizza in the cafeteria exists in a superposition of all possible toppings until you take a bite." News travels fast in the galactic scientific community, especially when that news involves a human solving centuries of quantum confusion between bites of a probability-defying sandwich. Within days, Dr. Martinez's solution
had spread across every quantum network, research station and coffee shop in known space. The Rigelian Science Council demanded proof, then spent 3 days trying to process the fact that the proof had been drawn on a paper napkin with a borrowed pen. Dr. Brightscale had to crystallize the napkin for posterity, though the coffee stain somewhat diminished its ceremonial appearance. "You have to understand," I tried explaining to a news crew from Galactic Scientific Monthly. "She solved it while eating lunch. Lunch! Not in a lab, not in a quantum meditation chamber, not even in a properly regulated gravity field." Professor Starweaver had taken to carrying a quantum sandwich with her everywhere, convinced that understanding consciousness required consuming quantum uncertain nutrients. So far she'd only achieved consciousness of indigestion, but her tentacles remained optimistically unknotted. The humans, meanwhile, seemed completely unfazed by their species' achievement. When asked about her revolutionary discovery, Dr. Martinez merely shrugged and said, "Sometimes you've got to stop thinking so hard and just let your brain do its quantum thing." The real change, though, was in how we viewed humans. We'd always known they came from a death world, that their biology was shaped by surviving conditions that would kill most sentient species. But now we understood. Their apparent recklessness wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. During a particularly memorable quantum physics department meeting, Dr. Brightscale summed it up perfectly. Humans don't just survive chaos, they think in it. They don't fight against quantum uncertainty, they swim in it. No wonder they solved the paradox. They never saw it as a paradox in the first place. The Galactic Science Academy had to revise its entire approach to research. Meditation rooms were replaced with casual break areas. Quantum computers were programmed to occasionally make jokes. Someone even installed a coffee machine that dispensed random flavors. Though after the quantum habanero mocha incident, some restrictions were added. Dr. Martinez, for her part, received the highest scientific honors the galaxy could offer. She accepted them all via video call, claiming she was too busy working on this really cool thing with quantum pizza delivery to attend the ceremonies in person. Perhaps most surprisingly, the Paradise Paradox's solution led to an unprecedented surge in cross-species collaboration. Turns out, when you understand that every conscious being is essentially doing the same quantum dance, just with different moves, it gets a lot easier to work together. The methane breathers started a quantum consciousness meditation group with the silicon-based life forms. The energy beings began teaching quantum awareness through interphasic poetry. Even the Crystalline Collective, once they recovered from their existential crisis, started a quantum consciousness appreciation society that met weekly for structured chaos appreciation. As for me, I keep Dr. Martinez's coffee-stained napkin equations framed in my office. Not the crystallized original, that's in a museum. This is just a copy, complete with a small doodle of what she called a smiley face in one corner. Sometimes when I'm stuck on a particularly complex problem, I look at it and remind myself, sometimes the best solution is the one you find when you're not looking for it at all. Last I heard, Dr. Martinez was working on applying her consciousness theory to faster-than-light travel, using what she called the quantum pizza delivery principle. If consciousness can exist across quantum states, why not matter? She's probably solving it right now, over lunch, while her equations make friends with another coffee stain. The universe, it turns out, has a sense of humor. And maybe that's the biggest lesson we learned from all this. Consciousness isn't just about thinking, it's about being. And nobody just is quite like a human from a death world, armed with coffee, quantum sandwiches, and the audacity to suggest that maybe, just maybe, we were all taking ourselves a bit too seriously. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lunch date with a quantum sandwich. I'm told today's special exists in a superposition of all possible flavors until you bite it. Dr. Martinez highly recommended it, though she did warn me to avoid the quantum habanero option. Apparently, it's consciousness expanding in all the wrong ways.